All right. Hello, everyone. Good evening. And good evening to my special guest, Foundry. Thank you for joining me.
Hey there. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me on, Straight Lace.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. So, on the agenda today is to talk about the recent second anniversary event, Forgotten Truths, and things it might imply for the story, for the lore of the game, for things moving forward, trying to figure out some questions. And I'm going to be honest, a lot of the stuff I have written down raises more questions than it answers because, we got down exactly like what happened, but someone just said in chat, is Ilia a goddess? Short answer, no. Long
Yeah.
answer to be explained. So let me actually pull up this. Yeah. Haha, behold, I have footage of game. So, fair warning, full spoilers for literally anything. Like, anything goes as far as spoilers for Dragalia Lost. Elysium said a thing, and I'm trying to find it. Well, first of all, Ilia said this. I'd sooner become a god than help make you one. And then he said, and that is what you'll become if you forge this pact, a god in human form. People will listen to you, obey your will, worship you. So, I've read into this and what it might mean, and as far as I can tell, when he's saying this to her, he's saying it like she won't have like the power over the world like Elysium does. She won't be able to control mana, but she'll have power over humanity because she's in a position of power, like something along those lines. That people will just do what she says. Any thoughts?
So what I found to be most interesting was a couple of lines before this, and this is one of the burning questions I still have about Ilia, when Elysium talks about them being connected from the very beginning and her going back to like the origins of humanity. So if she is a literal goddess, I feel like it might relate to how humans originated in the game, or in the world of Dragalia. Not necessarily what Elysium's saying here. Like, I do think Elysium's basically saying what you said of a god in human form, effectively the leader of her people, of human society, if she takes the pact with him. But this line is so fascinating to me, and it just I have no idea what it means. Why Ilia is like the chosen one, and why Elysium has been so close to her since her childhood, because even in some of the side stories for the adventurers, it seems like we get a glimpse of her very early childhood when she's just a baby with Mene, but we don't really know what it's like when she's a youth. And so, yeah, I don't know what her connection or past is with Elysium, or like what makes her so special. Why does she have this primal mark, which he pierces with the Dragalia that he creates from himself?
Yeah, the Primal Mark is definitely important. Like, the thing that bugs me the most is this line right here. No, I skipped it. Here. Elysium says, neither your understanding nor willingness is necessary as regards to this truth. Which is basically saying, I'm not going to explain anything, deal with it. And that bugs me, because he's just like, no, you don't get any lore.
Mm-hmm.
But,
Exactly.
like, the Primal Mark is definitely an important piece here, because primal, I believe primal is referring to beginning, so it comes from like the beginning of the human race, and so like, is there a primal mark for every like race, or is there just one? And so obviously the primal mark, whatever it is it either is Ilia or it resides within Ilia, and so it's definitely an important piece of something. I have notes on this for later. But yeah, at the start of my notes, is Ilia's pact. So, when they make the pact, over here, yeah. So when they actually make the pact, he pierces Ilia with the pact stone, and so this supposedly kills her. Like, based on Elysium's response, he says, like, rest in peace, Ilya, know that the salvation of the world begins now. I think he expected it to kill her.
Yeah.
And so there is a parallel to Christianity here that she dies and comes back a few days later. But, like, I think that might be where the parallel ends. And aside from that, let's see. Yeah, so one of the things I'm thinking here is pacts in the future are not fatal. In fact, Yudin makes pacts with Brunhilde to quell a volcano, Zodiark to keep Zodiark from dying, and this pact with Jupiter doesn't really do anything on that scale. But, like, the fact of the matter is pacts in the future are much safer than this. And I think that boils down to dragon blood. So, did this happen, like, did this almost kill Ilya because she doesn't have dragon blood?
Oh, that's a good thought. Possibly, because Elysium seems to expect her to die, and when he starts the pact, I feel like we don't get to hear the full incantation, but he says for her to repeat in the name of the first, and then he just lets out a roar. And that also kind of made me wonder about what Elysium was referring to. Is it the first of the species of humanity? Is that related to the Primal Mark? So the nature of this pact feels very different. Like in the modern era, we have dragon blood and the pacts in Alberia, and then we also have the soul pacts in Hinamoto that we know of, and they work a little bit differently from what I remember, where in the soul pacts it's kind of like using your life force, and the dragon is sort of in the front seat. And in the Alberian pacts it seems more like you're commanding the will of the dragon, or using the power of the dragon.
I mean, yeah, like, so I was looking into it, and when the other possessed Aurelius, he gained, like, control over Zodiark. So it's really interesting, like, that Ilya leaves because she didn't want to be forced into the servitude of Elysium. But then we look at the present Grestea, and we have humans making pacts with dragons and them being in charge, which is completely flipped of what it was back here.
Yeah, it is kind of odd. Like, I've never gotten the implication from the present day that dragons are subjugated compared to humans, but you do see some of the themes of encroachment. Like, if you think about certain characters like Leonidas and his use of alchemy on Mars, it feels a little bit uncomfortable with what he's doing with Mars and the experimentation, from what I recall. But I don't know. This is an interesting one. Just reading the chat, Winters posted, "Rest in peace" doesn't necessarily imply death in Japanese, so that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, but this was well, is that in the Japanese translation, or do you mean like what is that what it was? Is that how it was said in Japanese? Like, because in English, "rest in peace" very much means like death. So, yeah, on the note of the chat, yes, I will be doing a face reveal if we had 100 concurrent viewers. We're already at 66. You guys are doing much better than last time I tried this. And I saw another person who said Elysium is a big jerk. And my response is, you don't have to not be a jerk to save the world. But yeah,
I'm not an Elysium fan.
Oh, yeah, no, Elysium... So, it's really interesting to think about the... like, I want to say psychology about it. So basically, in real life, we're humans, and we tend to relate to the human characters in the game because of that, just on principle. So it's kind of hard to look at things from what another species' point of view would be. So Elysium is kind of in a tough spot here to begin with. It's either make the pact with Ilya literally right now, or we all die. So how he does it, though, is a bit tactless. Like, I believe he always, whenever he's referring to humans, he calls them human whelps. And I looked it up. Whelp translates to puppy. So yeah, he does not look at humans as equals. He very much looks down upon them. So yes, he's a jerk. But if he wanted to kill all the humans, he probably would do so. Like, it's very obvious when you think about it that he does want to preserve the human race. But he also wants to purge the corruption from them. So another biblical reference that actually ties into this is the story of Noah and the flood. When God flooded the world to be rid of corruption and only kept like humans he deemed like not corrupt or righteous, and then like with a bunch of animals. So basically, this kind of has a similar parallel where Elysium uses Moriarty and destroys all the corruption in humanity, or at least a whole bunch of it. And we directly see this happening when Moriarty kills August. So it's kind of a remaking of the world, trying to purge it of its corruption, while still keeping humanity alive in some regards so it can restart. But again, he's not looking at individual lives. So when you look at dragons aren't as numerous as humans, so it would seem, but they're more powerful and they live much longer. So I feel like Elysium would know the dragons more personally. Like, he would value one dragon life much more than he would value a single human life. And from that, he doesn't value human lives on any individual basis other than as a race. Because, like, he... Specifically, when he shows up, he addresses Midgardsormr as, so this is where you were, Windworm. So, like... And we know from Midgardsormr... Have you read Midgardsormr Zero's dragon story?
Yes.
Yeah. So we know from his dragon story that Elysium and Midgardsormr were friends. Like, so he values dragon lives, and then he values the humanity existing. But he doesn't value individual human lives. Therefore, when he talks to humans, he talks down to them, and if one human is being evil, he'll probably just kill it, and if most humans are being evil, he won't value any lives. So, when it comes down to it, and I mean, like, the other thing is he didn't force the pact with Illy. He's like, please, no, we gotta do this. We have to do this or we all die. Like, that's it.
I don't know, though, because, well, my take on it was I feel like maybe it was within his domain to stop the bombs that were happening on the Capitol, but he chose not to and sort of put it on Ilya, like, if you don't do this, all of your human friends and a lot of dragons are going to perish and the world is probably going to be engulfed in what is essentially suggested to be a sort of nuclear holocaust. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm confused about Elysium's dominion over things. And it gets to get a little bit further along in the epilogue, like, is Elysium just still out there? How long did Elysium live and proselytize? Like, if Elysium governs the ability of reincarnation in the world, is Elysium just somewhere out there in present-day Grastea? But to go back to what I was saying with the decision that he put upon Elia, like, I can't tell if... Would it not have just been within the scope of his power to stop these explosions from destroying the capital if he chose to do so? Because once he does form a pact with Ilya, he seems to have governance over mana, but he still can't stop Moriarty because of Moriarty being from another world. So maybe only at that point could he have done what he needed to do to stop the explosion and the conflict from happening.
I'm looking through right now to see if he could or could not have stopped it. Let's see. I could save the world, or you could. And he's talking to Ilya. Forge a pact and entrust to me the workings of mana. So I feel like he couldn't control mana on the scale he could after the pact based on this line. If you do this, I will be able to stem the flow. And so they established later on that he's probably not lying, although there's a little bit of doubt in that. But with this, they're basically saying that in making the pact, it allows him and maybe Dragonkind. I'm not sure. Midgardsormr says something earlier that... I think Midgardsormr just says something along the lines of forcing humans into the servitude of dragons. But, like, Elysium basically needs to do this in order to gain greater control over mana, is what this seems to imply.
Do you think that suggests that humans as a race were, like, had the most governance or control over mana? Maybe due to the Primal Mark, or, like, because we've always sort of seen in the present day, at least it seems like Sylvans and, like, maybe fairies, but we don't really know about them in the present, and then dragons have a really fundamental connection to mana. But... Well,
yeah, so we know that some humans are mana sensitive. So Maribel, for instance, is really sensitive to mana. And we know that Ilya is also sensitive to mana, because when she asks Zethi if she can fight, Zethia's like, a little, or something like that, and she's like, based on the amount of mana like pouring out of you, I'd say you're probably better than a little or something like that. So Ilia can sense mana as well. So let's see. Let me check chat real quick because that's been going past.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting theories in here.
Yep. No, someone said let's see. Milton said Elysium fought against Mars. That is correct. In Mars's dragon story, Mars sought out Elysium, so Elysium is still alive. Important question. Does Xena ever experience forgotten truths? Maybe. I'll get to that. I have notes on that. I have a paragraph of notes on that. Let's see. So going through my notes on Ilia's pact. Why Ilia? The Primal Mark. What is the Primal Mark that Elysium used to gain control of mana? Yep. The pact words. What does it do? It entrusts the workings of mana to Elysium. Died, came back a week later. Let's see. So the first Auspects. Where does the Auspects get their power? Now that is an important question. Because we know from Xena's story that the Auspects is born with holy mana. So, are you familiar with Avatar: The Last Airbender?
Yes.
So,
it's a great franchise.
I feel like it's kind of like the Avatar cycle in that every time an Auspex dies, another one is born. And then I was also looking into reincarnation recently with Phoenix. So we know that Phoenix can also reincarnate. And I read Phoenix's story. And basically, in her story, a mercenary went to see Phoenix because his son was dying, and he wanted her to save him. But then Phoenix is like, no. And then so he kills Phoenix. But then the healing spring doesn't work because Phoenix is dead. And so he burns the body of his son who died, and also the body of Phoenix. And then Phoenix, of course, erupts out of the flames because Phoenix. And then's like, your son's soul has been reborn into a child who was literally just born right now. You'll never see him again, but he is alive. And also he doesn't retain any memory. So reincarnation appears to be something that happens in the world of Dragalia Lost. It doesn't seem like it happens for every person that dies, but it can happen for some. And we know it happens with Midgard from Midgard Zero's story. So it's interesting to think that maybe the Auspects is a reincarnation of something, or like the reincarnation of the previous Auspects. So like the Auspects is like a line of reincarnation, which means Zethia, by that logic, would be a reincarnation several times down the line of Ilia, and might also possess the Primal Mark.
That's interesting because, well, you're probably going to get us into this eventually, but I wonder about Mene and her powers as an Auspex, as sort of the de facto Auspex. Did she have some kind of special abilities in her time, or did she actually just not? And eventually, like the fact that Ilia goes into the other world makes me confused about how the powers of the Auspex could have originated and be passed along. But at the same time, by the end of the story, it feels like Elysium has so much dominion over the workings of mana to be able to just reincarnate Midgard himself and where he'd lose his memories. I would imagine, like, if Elysium wanted to, he could just put like light energy into a child that's born into the world. So maybe it doesn't necessarily have to originate with Ilia, but it could be part of his design and Mene and his plan during that proselytizing phase.
Perhaps, because I'm wondering if Mene was an Auspex or not. So she would have taken the role of one, but would she have the powers of one? Because was Zethia the actual first Auspex, or was it Mene posing as Zethia who became the first Auspex? Because the problem here is that the Auspex isn't just a position, they actually have power. So what the Auspex does is they have the ability to take prayers, which are offered up by people around the world that are converted into mana, and then channel that mana to make things happen. So the Auspex is getting their power from somewhere. It's not like the role that anyone played, but that it actually comes from somewhere. And it's a holy mana too. So it could be related to Elysium. It could be related to the Primal Mark. It's still a little bit unclear.
Another question I had. So this is very specific, but I noticed this in rereading the story. But do you know the part when Zethia is receiving prayers from everyone?
Mm-hmm.
she's able to receive prayers from other timelines or further in the future because she gets a prayer from Yuden and not. And what really surprised me about that was Yuden said something to the effect of, "We don't know where she is, but that strange man has taken her away from us," which would have, I think he's referring to Nedrick, which happens, but that happens after the part where Morsayati sends her back to the past. That kind of, I lost track of that, but it was kind of weird timeline-wise because Baron hadn't yet absorbed or killed Morsayati.
Yeah, so when I first saw this, I'm like, oh, shoot, does this destroy my entire timeline? And I was like, oh, wait, no, we live in an infinite multiverse, it's okay. Basically, this happens infinite times, over infinite all the time. So this is, in some reality somewhere, by the idea of parallel realities, this event, where Yuden is praying, is always happening. So if time moves 1-to-1 between all realities, then this prayer being offered would just be caught by Zethia in a reality that is temporally happening at the same time. So that's probably very confusing, but it's possible, is all I'm going to say. Oh, yep, we did it. We hit 100. Okie dokie. Here goes. Everyone ready?
All right.
Alright. Yep, so you get face cam for the rest of the stream. Alright.
Good to see ya.
Yep. So, but yeah. Moving on, let's see. Shoot, what were we just discussing? Right,
so,
timelines.
Yeah, you told me how, and actually, I was going to say that was over my head, but it makes sense to me. Basically, like, this is happening at some point in some timeline. All of these are laid out. You can imagine, essentially, the way that, at least, actually, maybe it doesn't make as much sense to me as I said, but I can sort of imagine how this prayer, even if it happens after Zethia has been received or taken by Nedrick, could still reach the Zethia projection that was in Ilya's time, even though she was projected back before Baron sealed Morsayati.
So, one thing to consider is, are you familiar with my 3 types of realities theory?
Not very well.
Okay, so 3 types of realities. There's parallel realities, branching realities, and alternate realities. Alternate realities are the easiest ones to understand. That's like Dragalia Lost versus Fire Emblem Heroes. There's nothing in common in the timeline. It's 2 separate timelines with 2 completely different worlds. So then parallel realities are 2 realities that are completely identical. If one thing happens in a parallel reality, the same thing will happen in another one. Although they're not identical entirely in the fact that they're offset in time. So basically, you have the 2 realities, and then one happens slightly sooner than the other. So this means that in any parallel reality, any event that happens in that reality is happening always forever. Through infinite realities. So like right now, we'll in a different if we took reality, for example, like our reality, and we used this theory, basically this conversation would happen for the rest of time and also have always happened, but in a different reality. And the current reality in which it's currently happening is changing every interval of 1 divided by infinity, which is the smallest possible conceivable unit. So it's very hard to think about considering it's infinity, but that's what it is, I guess. And then branching realities are realities that branch either together or away, and they don't have to do it just once. For instance, in Chapter 1 of the main campaign, in the prologue, Xena interferes. But if Xena didn't interfere there, events probably would have gone the same way. They just might have made the pact with Megardsmar a little bit faster. So Xena's interference branches the timeline away, but then after she disappears, nothing changes, so it kind of branches back together.
That makes sense. And I think, like, early on in Forgotten Truths, I want to say, or it may be in one of the side adventure stories, but I'm pretty sure Ilya kind of explicitly says herself how things would be different had something different happened. Like, I think it was mentioned in a different context, maybe in reference to them falling into August's trap. But like, she kind of puts forward the notion that of branching, I think. But honestly, it is a little bit above my head how time travel works in Dragalia. But what I did like about this, my takeaway is a lot more basic, and that is the prayers that empower the Auspects have the ability to move between worlds, perhaps through the other world, or through some other means. But like, the Auspects is able to gather their power, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, one thing I also thought was interesting is I was curious as to what the Auspects is, and is it an exclusively human thing? Like, could there be a Sylvan Auspects or a Rockan Auspects? Or is there only one, or is there one for each race? But the thing is, when in the cutscene, the Auspects channels prayers from dragons, too. So, I'm not entirely sure how that would work. And going back to the previous point real quick, realities are like numbers, and that numbers extend to plus and minus infinity. But in daily life, we typically only deal with numbers between 0 and 100. So that's kind of the way you can look at realities. Like, we have the main Dragalia Lost reality, and the ones that interact with it, and the ones that it interacts with. And those are the only ones we really care about. There's only about 4 or 5 in there. So between those, it's a lot easier to understand. So one of which is, of course, Xena's reality. There are a few, like the Fire Emblem reality, the Mega Man reality, although those probably aren't canon. There are a few other realities that Xena's reality touches. But yeah, for the most part, there's just the main campaign. And then the Forgotten Truths reality would be its own reality as well. Alright, I need to pull up a... let me pull up a graphic real quick that I drew up. I'm pretty sure it is located here from Monday. It's on Discord. I have to scroll up because I accidentally saved over it on my computer.
And chat is asking about Audric's reality, or Fractured Futures.
Fractured Futures is another reality, yes. And my theory is that the Xena from Audric's reality is the one that died in Fractured Futures. Because canonically, a Xena died. And the fact that we don't see a Xena in Audric's reality makes me think that the one specifically from his reality died. Am I Monday yet? No, I went too far back.
Man, I realize in these conversations how the pacing of Dragalia's story releases, I always feel like by the time 2 months have passed, I've already forgotten a lot of the key details of what happened. So now when I try to think back to Chapter 5 and Chapter 10, at some point I'm going to have to do a full reread of the story, but I haven't decided when I need to do that yet. But like, a lot has transpired since... I'm pretty sure the only time I really fully played through the first chapter, which has a ton of things happening, including an appearance by Elysium, was 2 years ago when the game launched. Like, in the launch month is, I think, the last time I played it through fully.
Right, that's it. Alright. I can't find it. We're drawing it again. Alright, so. Basically, the idea with parallel realities is, so say this line in the middle is the main reality. So basically we have this main reality in the middle, and then let's see, from here I'm going to draw this line here. This line will be red. So here we have let me mark this point. Let's make it blue. Yeah. So here we have this point in the main reality. Let's call this the point where Morsoyati sends Zethia to 1,000 years ago. So this point right here is going to be 1,000 years ago in an alternate reality, in a parallel reality. Sorry, this is a parallel reality that is offset 1,000 years from the main reality. So Morciati sends Zethia into a parallel reality 1,000 years in the past. So, let's look at the main reality. 1,000 years in the past, which would be down here. So at this point, a Zethia from a different reality comes in and alters the past there. Or I wouldn't say alters, but creates the past. So the main reality has a Zethia in the past that is not the Zethia from our reality, because that one was sent to a different reality. Are you following me? There's only three realities in this example.
Yes.
So basically, Zethia can be in the past without being the same Zethia. Oh, thank you. The person who I made the infographic to show actually sent it to me on Discord. Let's open that. There we go. Here it is. Wonderful. All right. Yeah. So this is the full out thing. Yeah. So basically, yeah. This is what I just drew, except it's more detailed. So yeah. With that, let me go to my notes and look at what was next. Yeah. So talked about prayers. Talked about realities. Let's see. The Primal Mark was all right. So was the Primal Mark destroyed when making the pact? We don't know. Talked about going between generations. Is there a current Primal Mark? So I'm thinking one option is that Zethia is the current Primal Mark, but it could also be Yuden. Because Yuden is Elysium's chosen one.
Interesting. I don't know. I don't know what to think after the end of the epilogue, because I really wasn't sure what the ending implied about Ilya and Mordecai's presence. So that also kind of led me to question whether are they not just present in the current reality. So one possibility is the Primal Mark was destroyed, or its power somehow absorbed by Elysium. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
So if it wasn't destroyed, then it would seem to have remained with Ilya, and she left into the other world, is sort of what I was thinking, and would mean that it's kind of gone from the world. But she also... Well, Elysium fires Dragalia through her, the name of his pack stone, but it appears to go through the other side. So for a while, I was like, well, when she goes into the other world, she took Dragalia and the Primal Mark with her into the other world, and therefore Dragalia is lost. But that part really didn't make sense to me, because I've always thought of Dragalia as like the bond between humans and dragons.
Well, yes. So in Chapter 2, we have an exposition from Megardsimmer about what Dragalia is. And Dragalia is the bond between humans and dragons. And the physical formation of this is a pact stone. And so the Primal Pact Stone is he says that Pact Stones can exist between not just individuals, but between races. And the first of these, I believe, is the Primal Pact Stone, which is the one that we know was made between Ilya and Elysium, because the Primal Pact Stone was the one between them, and it was given to the Ilian Church to safeguard. The running theory is that the Primal Pact Stone was guarded by the Ilian Church for 700 years, and then we know it was shattered during the Second War of Binding. Megardsimmer said it was willingly shattered by dragons and humans to avert catastrophe. And the running theory is that it was broken to forge the sword that Alberius uses. And that's why it looks like a sword in the event.
I see. Okay. I buy it. That sounds like a good theory to me. Yep. So that would make sense. So then basically the Pact Stone was preserved in that world, and perhaps collected by the Ilian Church in the aftermath of what took place when Ilya left the world with Mordecai. But did she not leave with her Primal Mark intact, or like was the Primal Mark taken into the... I guess it's kind of hard to know, because we don't really know what the Primal Mark even is. Yeah, in some sense.
I'm trying to debate, though, because we know from Ilya's story that the Otherworld is not a place for humans to exist in. The only way a human can travel to the Otherworld without an otherworldly shard is with an Omega Key, which is what they do. The Otherworld shard allows temporary access to the Otherworld, that's safe. It's like safe, but it's temporary, and if your shard runs out of power, you're expelled back into your reality. We also know from Ilya's story that because she had otherworld shards on her person when she went to the otherworld via gates, or not gate, via Omega Key, that she was able to exist in there for a bit longer than if someone without otherworld shards. Like, I can't remember the name of the guy who went in there with her.
Logius.
Yeah. So then I would surmise that she and Mordecai probably died in the otherworld. But the question is, would their souls be trapped in there too? Because Morsayati is not really a corporeal being, I would say probably. So I really have no clue what happened there, but it is possible their souls got released back into the world during the second War of Binding. And so I have pulled up here, this is from the prologue, not the prologue, this is from the end of chapter 1. So basically, Zethia offers up a prayer to Ilya for help, and when she does, Yudin turns into Elysium. And then, like, they're both really surprised that he transformed without, like, Zethia's like, he shapeshifted without a pact? How is that possible? Do I somehow have the power to awaken his dragon blood? And then, let's see, there's a line I want from the other... Let's see. There it is. Dragon blood and the maiden's prayer have united to awaken the new king. And then he says the cycle repeats and that I cannot abide. So, this didn't happen in the first War of Binding, so this has to be something that happened in the second War of Binding. So, I'm guessing that Alberius knew the Auspects of the time. And together, he became the new king. Now, I only know of one other human character from that time. We all do, as far as I know, unless chat wants to remind me of anyone else. I should probably look at that. And that's Mim, original Mim. But I doubt she was the Auspects.
Yeah, because the other characters we know are dragons or a Sylvan, respectively, right?
Yep, and Cleo's not the Auspects. So...
Could Cleo be the Auspects? That sounds a little bit far-fetched.
As far as we know, there's only one Auspects at a time. So unless Cleo stopped being the Auspects, which I don't think happens. Plus, Cleo's never alluded to being the Auspects. Like, that's definitely something that would have come up. Besides, Cleo is the Sorceress Supreme. She doesn't need to be the Auspects.
Fair. Ancient Ray is all she needs.
Yep. Let's see. So, yeah. So this is an allusion to the second War of Binding. It has to be. Alright, so let's see. Moving on to my notes. Yeah, so Elysium. What does it mean to be a god or goddess in Grastea? So, Grastea doesn't really have traditional gods, like real-life faiths. God typically refers to something that is significantly more powerful than everything else, like Elysium being able to control all of mana. Another one is the Ancient One. The Ancient One has come up in the Accursed Archives, that one, and Stirring Shadows. So we don't know much about the Ancient One, but we know he takes sacrifices, and I would assume that happens in the form of souls. So
yeah, I mean, there's some evidence that dragons kind of occupy a space that we might think of as sort of adjacent to what we perceive as real world gods in various cultures. So there are different groups in the world of Grastea that like have a particular dragon that is their champion or otherwise has some influence over their society. Like you could think about Horus, I think, as a recent example. But also, I mean, thinking back, like they're not necessarily gods per se, or we don't really know as much about it, but like Amaterasu is another example in Hinamoto that's a very influential dragon. Other than that,
yeah,
I don't know if there's any notion of like an ethereal god outside of something that's physically manifest.
Yeah, I actually have notes on Amaterasu. So they don't have dragon blood. apparently, in Hinamoto, which is why they make soul packs. So how far away is Hinamoto that... Because the question is, did the First War Binding affect Hinamoto? I would guess it did, but then where was Amaterasu, and how does Amaterasu compare to Elysium? So, the question is, how far away is Hinamoto? Does it have a different history? Like, what part of Hinamotoan history intersects with Gristean history?
Yeah.
And another thing I have written down here is that they use what they call gleam shards to travel to Alberia. They use the otherworld to travel to other places in the overworld. Where do otherworldly fragments come from? Because my initial thought was that they came from whatever Ilia was doing, but then we got Ilia's story, and we know that they existed beforehand. And basically, so from Ilia's setup, we know that it's powered by a mana kiln, it's controlled by the Omega Key, and then I'm guessing the otherworldly fragments are what actually punches the hole in space. And maybe they channel mana from the mana kiln. The mana kiln just seems to be something that allows mundane individuals to use magic. So as far as that goes, that's about all I have on Amaterasu. We just know that Amaterasu is kind of like the local god, I guess, because like it's kind of like a government in the way it's set up. Like you have your local dragons, which like Garuda. Garuda's a local deity who oversees Lowen and Luis's village. And then you have like your regional dragons, which are like the those would probably be more like the 12 tribes or the 12 groups in Hinamoto. And then you have like your top of the line dragon, which would be Amaterasu or Elysium.
Yeah, or like the archangels are probably an example in northern Grestea that are like, they're more up there than your average dragon for sure.
Yeah. So, I have notes on the angels. So the angels serve the Ilian Church, but not Elysium directly. And then when and why did the angels sign up? We know from Ramiel's story that angel is a title, not an existence. So the word angel translates to messenger in reality. So that's kind of what it is. But I'm sure they probably just took the word angel because it's used in religion. And it's tied to the position. So Ramiel in his story joined because he, quote, his interests aligned to stop a disaster some centuries ago. So apparently angels are just dragons that sign up to serve the Ilian Church, and the specific thing about them is that they have a sigil. Now, we don't really know what a sigil is. We just know it's a link between a human and a dragon that is not a dragon pact, because dragon pact means does dragon pact mean shape-shifting? Because Ilia never shape-shifts.
That's true. I don't know. Shapeshifting, I've read some recent comments about this where I feel like people have illuminated for me that I know nothing about how shapeshifting works on a technical level, in the sense that if you're standing next to your dragon buddy, do you just become your dragon buddy? Or like I really don't know how it works technically, but I don't know if it would be considered required. Like, because Leonidas doesn't shapeshift into Mars, right? But they have a pact.
I think he shapeshifts into Mars in chapter 12.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
For some reason, I thought once he became, is Mars a Deimos enhanced or Phobos enhanced dragon?
No.
I don't really remember
the Phobos units were enhanced. I believe, it was Alex or Ellie? I think it was Alex. Or someone who said that they burn through their entire life in the course of one battle. Mars is just enhanced by alchemy. But yeah, chapter 12 is a good example of where both the dragon and the shapeshifted human exist on the same battlefield. So
yeah, I'm not sure on that.
But yeah, so
it feels like pacts can happen in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, Ilia's pact with Elysium is definitely different because she can sense how Elysium is feeling, which is not something that Yuden has hinted at all. I mean, the dragons haven't been in the story for a while, but she never turned into Elysium. And we know soul packs exist, which do allow for shapeshifting, but also burn through someone's life faster. And then there's dragon blood, which dragon blood is bestowed upon those who honor dragons with their acts and their actions. So I guess there are just different types of pacts. That being said, a sigil might be a type of pact, but it's not like a traditional dragon pact. And so also mentioned in Romual's story is that only a few select humans are able to form a sigil. And then Romual's like, but I have one more requirement. They need to have a good intellect. And like that begs the question, what are the requirements for being able to form a sigil? Like, because obviously dragon blood is required for dragon packs, or like soul packs require, I don't know what those require either, but apparently every type of pact has some sort of prerequisite.
Yeah, part of me wonders if it's not maybe just within the governance of the dragons. Like, they have to consent to give their power, and each dragon might have like a different condition. Because to me, when I was reading through the story, for example, of Incognito Nefaria and Horus, it's kind of like Horus just like lets her become the queen and like decides that he's going to be the protector and allow her to govern over her people. So like, in some sense, I feel that it's sort of regional as well. Like, maybe the dragons in Hinamoto are just like, we have this whole soul pack system. That is what we have here. And in the north, they have the worm sigil system, and the archangels themselves kind of decide who is worthy of the sigil or not. So perhaps the Alberian bloodline thing and the way that they form pacts, maybe that's just one way of dealing with a dragon and forming a relationship with them.
Yeah, because the term Dragalia would fit all of those like types of packs. They'd fit the angel sigils. They'd fit dragon packs from Dragon Blood. They'd fit Hinamatoan soul binds. Like, Dragalia works for all of those because it's a relationship between humans and dragons. Although, as far as we know, Dragon Blood's the only one that forms a physical object.
The thing that I find to be really interesting about what you mentioned, where Ilia can kind of feel what Elysium is feeling and thinking, is what happens. Like, does Elysium lose something by the fact that Ilia goes into the other world? Like, I kind of feel like I'm so fascinated. Like, what was Elysium's take on her disappearing and not choosing to just live on in servitude? Because it almost feels like she had some part of him and then she left in order to not just continue to exist in that world. Because, like, and maybe she wanted to go with Mordecai, and she kind of expressed her intentions there. But like, I don't know. I kind of felt like maybe there's something else going on there. It just, especially at the end when they show up. So you get the impression that maybe they've passed on, right?
Kind of. I have another theory about that later. But yeah, so it's... I was rereading through the initial chapters recently, and it's definitely implied that when a dragon pact is made, the dragon gets stronger. Like, when Yuden makes his pacts with, like, Jupiter and Zodiark and Brunhilde, like, they all get stronger out of it. Like, making the pact takes a whole lot of mana and puts it into the pact stone, and the dragon gets a bunch of that too. Like, literally saves Zodiark's life, because when Aurelius dies and Zodiark is freed, Zodiark's like, I'm gonna go stop the other and avenge Aurelius, and then he immediately gets pummeled to the ground. And then Yuden's like, oh no, you're dying, let us save you. And he's like, no, fight me, and make a pact, and the pact will save my life. And I'm like, okay. And so then he makes a pact with Zodiark, and in creating the pact, it stabilizes his condition. So it would appear that the dragons are getting stronger from making pacts. Like, they are, like, it's kind of like, and like, because Mars did this too, is he signed a pact, and the pact appears to exchange servitude for power, and that kind of sees how it goes. But then again, when Yuden makes his pact with like when he makes it with Jupiter, when he makes it with Mercury, they all quiz him on what his ideals are. Like, what is he promising them in return for their pact? So they're not just making a pact with a human for power. They want a specific human that they know isn't going to abuse that power, or abuse the control that the human gets over them. So, like, Mercury asks, like, what would you do with this power? And Yoon's like, I want to protect people. And Jupiter's like, what would you do with this power? And now, like, I want to keep dragons on the right path. So, yeah.
And that kind of contrasts with something I see getting mentioned in the chat is about dragon drive and worm binding. So that's kind of like a scientific experiment that was not at the consent of the human or the dragon that were part of the process. So it's kind of like a corrupted bond, if you will. Like, the other thing that comes to mind is when you mentioned the Ancient One, like, you think of characters like Lathna, right? Mm-hmm. Where how does Nyarlathotep reside within her? Like, what kind of bond do they have? Is that a Dragalia bond? Is that like some kind of dark magic happening?
Yeah.
But I don't know the answer.
Like, because I was really confused when Lathna, like, got announced and she had a unique dragon form, because I'm like, in Accursed Archives, Lathna wasn't Nyarlathotep. Lathna had nothing to do with White Nyarlathotep. White Nyarlathotep just took her form. And sorry for people who haven't read that yet, I know it's coming up. It's really good, you should read through it. But, like, the Lathna from Accursed Archives is fake. So when the real Lathna shows up, Heinwald specifically says, that's not the Lathna you just knew. This one has no memory of this event. She was a book the whole time. And so with that, then we get into Stirring Shadows, where it's like, oh wait, this Lathna is actually, like, becoming a White Nyarlathotep. And I wonder if it's because her form was chosen that, like, it continued to use her form with actually her. And we still don't know a lot about Nyarlathotep. We know that they are the emissaries of the Ancient One or something. Mm-hmm. Basically, I'm pretty sure from Nyarlathotep's story, they collect sacrifices for the Ancient One. However, we know from Nyarlathotep's story that they prefer corrupt souls. So in Nyarlathotep's story, he finds a different Nyarlathotep, I'd surmise, finds a human that is not corrupt, and they try to corrupt them, and the human refuses time and time again. They, like, have a pure heart through the story, and by the end of the story, like, the Nyarlathotep's like, what do you desire? And he's like, I desire you, like, you know, friendship and kinship. He's like, that is greed, you're dead. And then it sacrifices him, and it's like, oh, okay, there goes any character development. But so yeah, it's interesting to think how Nyarlathotep works through Lathna. Because Lathna isn't a dragon, for sure. She doesn't have horns or a tail. So it's not like Mim, where she turns into her dragon form. I had another point. Where was I going? Shoot.
So prior to this, we were starting to talk about, I think, what happened when Elia departed into the Otherworld gate, or at least that was on the docket. I don't know if that was in the immediate future, but yeah, a lot of interesting theories. Like, people are talking about Draco shifting. Honestly, right. I don't remember Chapter 12 that well.
Dragon binding was the other thing I wanted to touch on. I haven't read Belina's story. I am missing 5 adventurers, and Belina's one of them. So I don't know what happened with the experiment with Belina. I really should just get on the wiki and read that. But yeah, like, Aldred shapeshifting into a dragon it's not unholy, but it's unnatural. In that it's kind of a forced bond, because, like, we know that Barbatos is fused with, like, Aldred. Like, they share a body, and they're just shape-shifting between the two. We've seen it go full Barbatos, we've seen it go full Aldred, and we've seen in between, which is why I'm a little upset that he doesn't have a dragon form, and he's instead a dragon drive unit. But, like, it's called, what, dragon binding?
I think worm binding.
That's it. Yeah, so that's more of an unnatural, forced type of bond, I guess. I'll have to do more research on that.
I don't want to derail us any further from any important point you want to bring up next, but I do have to throw out there, because I want to ask you. I don't remember if we know the origins on this, but Ferris has worm scale, right?
Mm-hmm.
do we know about worm scale as a disease? Is it like, could that have been a worm binding experiment gone wrong? You know, like, is the next water Gala dragon gonna just emerge out of Ferris?
I don't think so. As far as I know, worm scale is a curse that results from dragon blood, because Nedrick supposedly had it when he was born, and it supposedly killed him, but obviously it didn't. Or maybe it did. Maybe he's brought back from the dead. We know that necromancy is not beyond, dare I say, the unholy vegetable Pipple is like, I wasn't entirely kidding when I did How to Play Pipple and I said he was necrotic experiment. Like, he might have been a human soul fused with a potato. So
Hey, we've seen that just your run-of-the-mill Imperial Mage can revive armies of the dead.
oh
So.
gosh, the current event makes so many lore holes. Like, it's interesting to think, though, that, because I was trying to figure out how was Morsiati revived during the second War of Binding, and the answer is Diurnell, because the soldiers that were revived were from the second War of Binding 300 years ago, and they have the Diurnell logo. So Diurnell was probably like, yeah, Perdition's probably pretty accurate. Let's go ahead and revive the other, and then they did, and then they apparently didn't regret it. Well, of course they didn't regret it. The other likes the other's army. Like, the other likes conquering the world, apparently. Because, like, the other in the first War of Binding is like, I'm just going to destroy everything because I am hatred. And then in the modern day, like, I was rereading through chapter 10, and the other is just so snarky. Let me see if I can find one of the, like, the voice, the lines.
Yeah, I totally agree with the difference there. That's one thing that really kind of caught my attention toward the end of the Forgotten Truths raid, when we got back to the present day and we got to, like, chatty Morsayati in the present day, talking to Zethia about, like, this is my evil scheme and I will be in all the timelines. And in the past he was just like, Elysium, and just evil incarnate, hatred incarnate. When did he kind of become so
I mean,
I don't know the word.
700 years in the other world to chill out. Like, but here's a line from the other as possessed Zethia from chapter 10, when he's just bumped into Yuden and crew. And, like, Yuden's like, Zethia, or should I say Morsayati? And Zethia's like, how rare it is to hear that name uttered by mortal lips. We've not come face to face like this since we first claimed your sister's body for my own. How odd that we meet once again in a binding ruin. Like, reading through the story, like, he's just so snarky with everyone. It's weird. It's like, and another thing from the chapters that I was looking into is something called the Flow Eternal. And let me find my notes on the matter because I wrote down things. Right, so chapter 5 mentions multiple sealing sites. The Binding Ruins is just one of them. We know that Clave Loyale, whatever it's called, in chapter 10 is another one, and then the place they go to in chapter 8 is another one. And then supposedly in chapter 8, Leonidas mentions a sacred shard, and then removes it and opens another Flow Eternal, which summons forth fiends. Now, the other says in chapter 5, that is the true purpose of the Diurnell Empire, to defend the Flow Eternal. Right, he also says the Flow Eternal is a river from the lees of hate, anger, and resentment from the Sacred Shard's seal. So basically, it's his essence. It's his essence, and it summons fiends. Kind of like how the fiend Mehu Wong, I believe, from Time-Worn Torment, also summons fiends just by existing.
Yeah, I've been thinking about him a lot in this recent event. I want to go back and reread the story for that raid, because I feel like he also seemed to be on a, not maybe the same level of cataclysmic power, but for your fiends, he was like a top, S tier fiend compared to a lot of your average fiends, and he had such interesting character to him, and like his whole relationship, similar to what we were talking about earlier with Amaterasu. A big thing I was thinking about in this event is, if this is a world-ending catastrophe, what is happening with like the Chillin relics and their people? Like, they are an ancient race supposedly, but like, were they even around 1,000 years ago? I don't really know.
Yeah, like, we know the Sylvans. I think the Sylvans showed up in Forgotten Truths. It's just like once like, oh, what are those humans up to? Why is the world being destroyed? But a note about fiends is that we saw that fiends are corrupted creatures. Like a human turns into a fiend and a dragon turns into a void dragon. So if fiends are just normal creatures corrupted by dark mana, it makes sense that the Flow Eternal would summon forth fiends. And if fiends are built up in the other world, then like opening that up could let forth fiends into the world, the Flow Eternal. And if the other world is the space between all worlds and has access to infinite realities, then literally all it takes is one reality that dumps a fiend into the other world, and suddenly there are infinite fiends of that type in the other world. So
Yeah, I think you described it to me pretty well when you said that sort of like the other world is kind of like a big train station where you can go, you enter there and you can go into any world or any timeline. But as we've already talked about earlier, like you can only stay there as a human if you have sufficient otherworld fragments to protect yourself, and you can only enter typically with something like an Omega key. But I started to think that maybe the one of the very interesting things to me in the raid as well was like, what is Mordecai when Mordecai comes out of the other world? I don't know if there's perhaps time travel implications. Like, was that spark of life that became Mordecai put there into the other world from some other world that's connected to the other world? Or does he just come out of it and somehow have this incredible power when he's put into an alchemic body? Like, I was very confused about that, and I started to think maybe the other world's kind of like the afterlife. So that's not really a super well-founded theory, but when we talked earlier about reincarnation, it kind of made sense to me, because when Mordecai comes out of there, he doesn't really have any memories or any sense of self. And it seems like humans can't really survive in there very long. But that doesn't really feel complete either. So I think it is maybe just the space, just the transit hub between all the different worlds.
Yeah. Mordecai is definitely not a human soul. We know from his story that a dragon immediately recognizes him as an otherworlder, based on his mana. So he is not a human soul. We also know from Sophie's story and from Yukata Cassandra's story that when souls die in Grestea, at least, they roam the world as mana on the wind. So that I made a theory video about that like a few weeks back about my thoughts on what the afterlife would be, and basically it's souls become mana. And now we know, like, look, as I did more research, that some souls do reincarnate. And like other souls choose, like, I don't know if they choose to keep that form, but like they just have that form. And like Sophie's story says that souls were congregating around the Halidom, and that there was one in particular that was defending Yuden and giving it plot armor. So
yeah, it's interesting because we know prayers can pass through the other world, or at least through different timelines. So it kind of makes me wonder if like can what else can just travel through there. And one of the things I recall, because we sort of talked about, but we never really got around to trying to answer this question, but like where otherworld fragments come from, like how do we get them in the various raid events that we're doing? And I can't really think of a good raid event that had the justification for what otherworld fragments are off the top of my head.
I don't think we got a raid event that said how they're made. We just got let me pull up, I have the someone pinged me on Discord, I'll read that later. Anyway, I have archived footage of let me find it. Let's see.
It feels kind of suspicious to me that these otherworld gates, Yuden is always seemingly involved in these raid events. Obviously, he's the protagonist, but like, I don't know. It feels like there feels to be a connection to me. The fact that he has this ability that seemed to be only available to like the elite alchemists in a technologically advanced society. It's kind of odd that like we suddenly in all these raid events are doing these otherworld battles.
Okay, so first I have to kill the king, which should be after this one. And then the king drops the otherworld fragment, right? I feel like I missed it. It's got to be around here somewhere. Okay. Yeah, I'm looking through Loyalty's Requiem right now to, okay, so it's before this. Yeah, so there's the king. Here it is. Otherworld Fragments. So Cleo recognizes it immediately. Only in books. They are powerful fragments dropped by equally powerful fiends. The mana inside is said to be strong enough to bend the fabric of space itself. Okay, so from what it seems is that very powerful fiends generate these inside them. Kind of like, are you familiar with Xenoblade Chronicles 2?
Yes, I am.
So kind of how Titans create core crystals, seems like. Powerful fiends would just create otherworldly shards by congregating mana.
Okay, that makes sense to me. So, and that kind of checks out with the idea that, like, we know something about the otherworld presence is able to corrupt mana. Like, we have a lot of evidence that fiends are coming out of the otherworld when portals are opened.
That makes sense, that fiends get strong enough to break out of the otherworld, which is what raid bosses are doing. Like, Fraganoth.
Yes. Or we trick them and, like, force them into the otherworld so that we can seal them in there.
Alright, let's see. Yeah, so that is where Otherworld Fragments come from. Let's see, moving on to my notes. Let me see if I can find this part. Okay, so I had notes for seeing eye to eye with Elysium because I was like, okay, this is how I'm thinking this is going to go down. Because Mordecai says to August, like, is the world truly saved if it is ruled by someone who sees life as disposable? And then Ilya says, friends are amazing. They help you understand things you don't even know you get. And then I was like, oh, this is totally foreshadowing for what they're going to do with Elysium. And then they didn't. So, because they also hinted that Ilya could sense what Elysium was feeling, and I'm like, oh, so Elysium's gonna sense what Ilya's feeling. And then they didn't. So
what were you thinking that Elysium or Ilya might do?
I was thinking, like, Elysium would start to value humans, like, before the event ended, and, like, Ilya still, like, had the idea of the Ilian church going that Mene saw forth to make humans an instrumental part of the balance of the world. So that Elysium has to value them. But, like, I guess that is more than he was already doing. Because Elysium just didn't want humans to go extinct. But he also didn't care if most of them died. So...
yeah, we never really got that change of heart moment for Elysium. But I kind of think, to how you described Elysium earlier, I feel like I'm sort of at peace with how Elysium is. Where even though I'm not really a fan of Elysium in terms of the methods, I kind of have reconciled it in my own headcanon that Elysium just has, like, a transcendental view of the world. So, like, Elysium just experiences the mana and, like, everything around him, as opposed to whether that's manifest as life or nature or whatever, or dragonkind. So to me, like, the failure to acknowledge humanity as a race may just be kind of in the same way that humans are just, like, nature. You know, it's animals, it's plant life, it's everything else. I guess I can kind of justify it a little bit more to myself, but I certainly still didn't really feel good about where Elysium ended up. Because, yeah, they could have gone that friendship route, right? Where, like, Elysium senses Ilya, like, understands friendship, and then he's like, oh, this is the bond I feel with Midgard. We're, like, best buds. I need to save humanity. They have the same capacity for understanding each other. I don't know. Like, it felt like we don't really know a lot about the government at that time or Ilya's parents, except that they were really good alchemists. There's so much mystery. I don't know that we'll ever go back to the First War of Binding. I definitely feel like this event raised a lot more questions about the Second War of Binding that I'm really curious about. But, like, another question I had was, you know, Mene and her 12 or 13 siblings. I think she had 12 and she's maybe the 13th. And there was a fairy king. Like, could he forgive the fact that Mene decided to become the Auspects? Do fairies now have bad blood because one of their royalty was taken to become part of this human dragon conspiracy? Like, there are a lot of just random little things. Like, how did such a corrupt government come into power with August and Logius, who just don't even seem to care to protect the people?
The same way it's doing currently. Rereading through the campaign, Leonidas is doing the exact same thing, or he was in Chapter 8. In Chapter 8, he was purging non-perditionists. He was like actively had Alex go hunt down non-perditionists to kill them. And like purging the weak from his town. And we know that he is using alchemy to be the strongest around, the strongest military power. Leonidas is a very strong parallel to August, and it's only because he lost to Uden that he's starting to get some character development and move away from that path. Although we know that he's not moving entirely away from that path, and we also know that the world is moving back towards alchemy again, with mana casters and other such. And this is something that, of course, has been hinted at. Dragalia has been lost. The Primal Pack Shard was destroyed 300 years ago, and humans and dragons have drifted apart again. So
that's a good way to put it. Because you're right. You can kind of see the writing on the wall with some of that, and like it's honestly going to be very bizarre to me. Next chapter or whenever we've sort of allied with Leonidas and Shell at this point, but like thinking back to some of the things they were doing, it's really I guess you can use wartime to sort of justify some of those atrocities, but like they were kind of bad people.
I mean, Alex was killing people and they forgave her before the chapter was out.
That's true. I'm pretty sure Ron's will, like, anytime there's bandits, like, they don't really end well with Ronsel around, at least what it sounds like he's doing to them. So, I mean, there is a certain amount of that happens, but, I don't know. Like the that period just seemed really interesting to me, and I agree though. Like there are these makings of sort of technology seeping back in. The Manicaster weapon type has been added. We have these alchemic experiments. Apparently, Baron and Ferris seem to have a lot of knowledge about alchemy, or at least about ancient history and maybe some of the technology that was present at the time. Because I think in the chapter that kind of blew out Baron, they were using a mana kiln near the lake, from what I remember. But yeah, I feel like we've drifted from our original topic.
How did the Alien Church get so corrupt? From Brian in the comments. Simple. People want power, and the Alien Church is a hierarchy. Just play nice until you get to a position of power. Or don't play nice. Use corruption to get to a position of power. It happens in any organization. If people want power, they go after power. So, of course, there are non-corrupt people in the Alien Church. We know from the interlude where Volk showed up that one of the higher-ups had one of the bishops or something killed because he was devout. So, and the corrupt ones who don't actually believe in the faith see that as a threat to their power, because they got the non-corrupt ones tend to guide people better. Let's see. So moving on, Fairies and Mene. We touched on this. We know that Mene had communication with the Fairy Kingdom from her adventurer story. So she could send messages to them via Megardsimer, who would deliver messages to them for her. And we know at one point she was planning to return. So she probably sent them a message being like, I can't return, I have a job to do to see something through. And just to make sure they couldn't force her back, she broke her wings. And also, of course, to take the appearance of a human. Yeah, that was really sad. And it was foreshadowed multiple times. Let me pull up a thing here. This is the prologue video. So this kind of details the story a little bit. We got one of these for Doomsday Getaway as well that kind of spoiled things. And so this intro video goes through the story a little bit. And at its ending, we see Mene, and she begins to cry, and then her lantern dims and her wings turn to dust. And so this intro video is the first thing that foreshadows that she's going to give up her wings. And then in her chapter 1 of her character story, she talks about how fairy loses their wings, they lose their ability to change size, and they basically give up their inheritance, and they're practically human. And we also knew she was going to do this from Midgard's Summer Zero story. So like that just kind of spoiled the epilogue as we got it, and gave like not quite as many details. But then it like went more into Midgard's reincarnation. But because Mene did give us more on how fairies work, we're almost certainly getting Not soon. Because in the digest, they had that point, that like moment with Not like, I want to help. So.
Oh, so do you think Not is the next free adventure?
I think she might be. I had another idea in mind of who the next adventure might be. It's not Leonidas. It was someone else that I was thinking might be. I can't remember who it was. I had an idea for it. But yeah, no. If Not is the next one, she'll grow to adolescence and be a mana caster. The next unit, regardless of who it is, will be a mana caster. Because they need to give us a welfare one from the main campaign. So it'll be a 4-star. No, it could be a 5-star mana caster. Hopefully it's not a light, long range one. We've seen too many.
I totally feel... And I hate to say this, but I feel like Not is going to end up making the same sacrifice.
Like breaking her wings?
I don't know. I kind of feel that way. Like, I think we're headed north. We're maybe going to find out a little bit more about the fairy kingdom, and something there is going to lead Not to decide, like, I don't want to be a part of this. I want to be with my group of people. But she also doesn't seem to have hit her growth spurt because she's normal size, or rather, normal size for a fairy. But if you think about it, she would be the perfect mana caster, right? Not Slumber Shot. It foreshadowed everything. Yep.
But I mean, if she's a fairy, she should have innate magical powers. So she shouldn't need a mana caster. Although, from Joe's story, mana caster Joe, said that the mana caster basically needs no skill. You just point, name, and fire. And for someone who's never trained with a classical weapon, mana caster sounds perfect. So... Although I'd probably see something more like a wand, or like Mene was a bow. But yeah, so as far as her wings breaking, I think that is definitely possible. And more likely than not. But with it, the question is she going to break them willingly, or is it going to be a tragic encounter with something?
I kind of feel like it's going to be like her gala moment, where she's like... You know, I can imagine the cutscene playing on the trailer where they're like not standing up for the group and she decides to break her wings in order to save everybody or something. But I don't know. The fairies are still a huge mystery. Like, a lot about Northern Grastea is still a huge mystery to me.
Yeah. So next up in my notes is Zethia's interference. So the question becomes... Would Forgotten Truth still have happened if Zethia wasn't there? And I've come up with a workable theory. So it's possible that... so we know from the end when the other says that world becomes the roots of a tree that branches off into many realities. One of which is, of course, Xena's. One is the main campaign. But there could also be a reality that didn't create the other. There could be a reality that simply summons and then binds him again during the First War binding. So without Zethia, Ilya's work could be obtained by the military and used to summon the other, the one that was created in Forgotten Truths with Zethia. Ilya still makes the pact and is still able to seal the other, and then leaves for the same reason to avoid servitude to Elysium. So there is a workable timeline where Zethia isn't there, but I don't think there needs to be a timeline where the other isn't created, because there just doesn't need to be. There's already infinite others, so... Or who knows, maybe there is just one other, but that wouldn't make sense because the other retains memory. So the other would, as Xena retains her memory of all the realities she's been to, and changes in new ones, like the other would do the same thing. Every time he fails, he would do something different and get stronger. So that does make a little bit of sense in how he would change over time, like how he would learn in the hate in his form of hatred would eventually learn to use intelligence to subdue a world instead of just hatred and destruction.
Yeah. We certainly, from Mordecai's adventure story, we get Mordecai learning basically everything about the world, and even considering himself to be a weapon of war at first, and thinking that's his only purpose, and therefore wanting to leave the group. But it could make sense to me that if Morsiadi is Mordecai's hatred manifest, then like it's honed over time to be more effective at its objective. Like in the beginning, Mordecai could barely say anything. When Morsiadi's created, he's basically just screaming his hatred for what happened to Ilia. So it seems plausible to me that like over many timelines and many failures, he's become more intelligent. But it kind of feels like, would there not have to be some timeline in which Morsiadi has succeeded and destroyed Elysium, or would Morsiadi not try to go back to like when Elysium was just a wee babe and to the trunk of the tree?
I mean, he could do that. Like, he could kill Elysium as a child, but then that's only winning in one reality when he wants them all, apparently. But, like, the question would be, if that is the only reality he's created in, then the main campaign would be his final reality, the one he's killed in, the one where he's consumed by Baron. We don't know if that kills him, but it's kind of implied at the end of Forgotten Truths that something died. So,
do you remember? I don't know if you're able to pull up that scene, but like, Baron said something like, "It's just as somebody told you, you're going to die." Like, not exactly that, but like he implied that Morsiadi knew this through another party, essentially. Yeah.
I happened to land right on the line. Zethia said, "I heard someone's death knell, and I knew I was no longer a prisoner."
A little bit before this, when he's being absorbed, Morsiadi says something.
Baron says, "Struggling is useless. You are fated to meet your end here." One you know well said as much. What does Morsiadi say?
So who is one you know well, right? Who told Morsiadi? Like, is it another Morsiadi? And the first time I read this, when it was saying, "Who the devil are you?" When I was listening to it, it kind of sounded like Baron's voice to me, but then it was kind of clear it wasn't Baron's voice. So my initial read of this was, it appeared as though Baron succeeded in taking over Morsiadi, but actually Baron was shocked by the power and like Morsiadi actually won. But yeah, after listening to it with the audio, it definitely seems clear that it that was the other screaming out.
Yeah, so this line here is definitely from Baron, because he's telling that Morsiadi struggling is useless. But this means that someone that Morsiadi knows told Baron the future. Because one you know well said as much. He's telling Morsiadi that he knows that Morsiadi dies here. It could be Fairies, but I doubt it. Baron is still kind of a mystery. We know very little about Baron.
Yeah. I have no idea. Like the only character that I feel like knows Morsiadi well is like maybe Elysium, because they battled throughout the timelines.
It could be Elysium. It could be Ilia, for all we know. It could be Mordecai.
Yeah, I don't know. Baron is a very odd character.
Yeah,
hard to read.
Well, we'll probably learn more about him going forward. And another thing with Elysium is he probably hasn't had his character development yet. Like, the reason they probably didn't develop him in Forgotten Truths is because his development comes later in the story. So
I could see that. I don't know if we want to talk about this now, but like there's all these theories floating around about Yuden, and who is Yuden? What is the relationship between Yuden and
I have
Elysium?
a theory.
Okay. What is your theory?
So, remember how we were talking about reincarnation and how Zethia might be the reincarnation of Ilia? What if Yuden's the reincarnation of Mordecai?
I could see it. I do kind of feel like there's some otherworldly weirdness about Yuden.
Now, I will say it's unlikely, because if he had an otherworldly soul, the dragons would immediately notice, and that there'd be a problem with that.
Do the dragons have an issue, though, with otherworlders in...
Yes.
The present?
On principle... Oh, you mean in the present?
Yeah, like in Yuden's time.
I want to say yes, because I feel like fairy culture probably wouldn't change. And dragon culture probably wouldn't change as much either. I don't know, it's been 1,000 years.
Well, I'm not sure, but I do like that. There's also this theory going around of, like, is Yuden like the alchemical child of Ilya and Mordecai or something? Like, is Yuden another spark from the other world that was given a body or something like that?
So one thing at the end of the epilogue is that it shows Ilya and Mordecai. Ilya says, guess it's time for us to go too. And then Mordecai responds, sounds good, let's go find what was lost. Now, so that to me sounds like Dragalia lost, you know? Like Dragalia's been lost, let's go find it, which is exactly what Yuden's doing. And the other thing Ilya says is, guess it's time for us to go too. That means they're following someone who's already left. Or who's already gone. So who are they following?
Yeah, and if you go back, it's Yuden says, let's move out right before that.
Yep.
And it's the same background. So that's why people were thinking, like, are they in the present day or...
Well, if the lighting around this is not typical lighting. So, like, when this field is in the background, usually it just shows the character in normal lighting. But, like, there's, like, it's much brighter around the edges. Now, this is commonly used in media that I've seen to represent heaven or an afterlife, or that someone is dead. Or gone on to a better place. Or that, like... It's used in flashbacks. It's used in not flash forwards as much, but like it's used to show that this is not physically happening here. So something is definitely going on here, and we definitely haven't seen the end of their legacy. But yeah, like something definitely became of these two. Even if they died, their souls would persist, or that maybe they were eaten by the Ancient One. I don't know.
Now that you say that. The way you could kind of read this in a tragic way, right? That like they're physically in the same space, but they have this white ethereal glow to them. Maybe they were roaming the earth, and this is the moment in which their spirits depart. Like now they are no longer of the earth, and when they decide it's time to go, like they're like, "Peace out, we're gone." And maybe it's because they see Yuden like moving his army. And maybe he's reached a point of like maturity where their need to watch over the world has ended. I mean, that's kind of on a limb, but...
Yeah, but Mordecai says, let's go find what was lost, which feels like they're going to take an active part in it somehow. So, and like that is what Yuden's doing. Yuden is fighting for Dragalia, which is why it's so strange that the dragons have been dropped from the campaign. Like, I was rereading Chapter 9, and like Jupiter's just walking out with them into the field area, like the desert area, and they're like, Mim's like, Jupiter, why did you come with us? It's like, well, I heard this place is famous for its sunlight, and I was bored and wanted to come hang. And like, okay, why doesn't this happen again? Why are the dragons dropped after Chapter 10 just as fast as they drop Gala units after they perform their Gala entrance? Like,
yeah, no, it's a very good point. Point well taken. It's like what they did to Luca in the first part of the story. The dragons should have a lot of things to say and do, right? Like a lot of these secrets that we know nothing about, it's basically probably a lot of the Great Worms might know what happened. Yeah, somebody asked earlier toward the beginning of the stream, where do the Great Worms rank? Like we talked about, there's local dragons and there's like your regional dragons. And the Great Worms, I mean, if they fought alongside Alberius, you would think that they have some amount of knowledge, but I honestly haven't read too closely. Like, I'm sure Mim's stories talk about some of that.
Another thing that I remembered to bring up is, so a lot of people had a problem with the way Elysium, like, the choice that he made, that he forced, that he apparently forced. Like, he's like, make this choice or the world will end. And one thing I'd like to bring up is the problem people had with Yuden's choice in Chapter 14, because you can't have a problem with both. Because Yuden's choice was, I'll trade the world for one life. And what Elysium wanted was, I'm not trading one life for the world. So they're kind of opposites in that regard. And that Elysium was willing to sacrifice Ilia to save everything, whereas Yuden was willing to sacrifice everything to save one life.
Do we know if Elysium fought Mars after or before the Second War of Binding? I haven't read Mars' story.
I think it was after. It seemed to happen in not too long of a time span.
So Elysium would have still been alive. And do we know much about the relationship between Alberius and Elysium?
Nope.
Okay. Part of me, when they were first introducing Elysium, I got such villainous vibes from Elysium that part of me felt like they were going to seal Elysium. And I kind of wondered at the end of the story, like, why didn't Ilia take Elysium with her? Or, like, if she could have just opened Otherworld gates and Elysium has no control over things from other worlds, could she not just suck Elysium into an Otherworld gate? But what I started to think was, is there some relationship between Elysium and, like, the dragon blood? Was perhaps Elysium sealed into the dragon blood that flows through all of the characters? And so when he breaks free of Yuden in the prologue, I thought, like, is that Elysium doing what Morsayadi's kind of always trying to do so that they can continue their clash or something like that? But I feel like that's very far-fetched by now. Like, there's probably a lot of people and ways to debunk that.
Yeah.
But at least when I was reading along, I was like, I do feel like Elysium's story is unfinished, and maybe it'll happen or finish in the Second War of Binding.
Yeah, I brought up Mars' story on the wiki. He challenged Elysium, couldn't land a single blow on him, despaired, burned down the countryside, and then Leonidas shows up. So it's pretty recent.
Okay, so Elysium he's just chilling. So why does he allow all this corruption to happen in the Ilian Church?
Yeah, my question is where... Because here's the thing, Elysium showing up, well, the world's not in, like, make this decision right now or we're all dead yet. But a world did get there. Xena's did. Xena's world is post the other taking over. So where's Elysium in that world?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that to me could be evidence of the mortality of Elysium if there's no Elysium, or maybe did Morsayadi just win in that world against Elysium?
It's possible.
He wants to win in every world, so he's not satisfied with that.
Like, we know that the other wants to possess Yuden to gain control of his dragon packs, because we know that having a dragon pact means you can literally force the dragon's will. So as Elysium's chosen one, would possessing Yuden just mean victory? Because what if Yuden does have a pact with Elysium and just doesn't know it? Because he shapeshifts into Elysium. So would taking over Yuden gain control of Elysium? That's a scary thought.
That kind of makes sense.
Fun story.
Yeah.
It's not the scariest thought I have on this list.
Oh, okay. Tell me more.
We'll get there. I'm most of the way through these notes. But yeah, as far as Yuden being a reincarnation of Mordecai says, let's go find what was lost. That's what Yuden is doing. If Zethia is a reincarnation of Ilia, it also explains why he has such strong relationship with Zethia. Also, Mordecai and Ilia were prepared to sacrifice themselves for each other and also the world. And let's see. This could also relate to why the other wants to possess Yuden after Zethia, because he would be reuniting with his original self. That's the only evidence I have for the theory, and it's still lacking a lot of pieces, like the fact that he's not recognized as an otherworlder by dragons. Let's see. We already talked about angels and apostles. And then, let's see. For my next notes, I actually read Ariel's story the other day. She's the only dragon I don't have, but I figured, considering she's like one of the Ilian faithful ones, she might be worth reading the story of. And so what I wrote down from her story is that the word of the goddess is for harmony between humans and dragons, which makes sense. That's what Ilya was striving to do, to make humans instrumental. And that dragons have a responsibility to help humans survive, but not to keep them from being stupid. And this is also in line with what Elysium was doing, that he wanted to keep humans alive, but get rid of the stupid ones. Alright, moving on. So this was asked a long time ago in chat, I know. Does Xena know about Forgotten Truths? Because if Forgotten Truth is canon, does Xena already know about this? For one, she would be familiar with mana projection, because this would happen before she used the Dawn Shard. So Xena's timeline is either the same or similar through Chapter 5, because Xena's interference in Chapter 1, without that, it was basically a minor slowdown. It was a minor setback. It wouldn't really change anything. But after Chapter 5, they don't go to the Binding Ruins, and things start to change drastically. For starters, Aurelius thwarts Baron, probably, and Yuden ends up getting possessed, because Baron is no longer present in Chapter 14 to prevent that from happening. And then, alternatively, with that, if he also thwarts Fairies, then Chapter 13 never happens, and the invasion happens a lot sooner. And, like, there are a number of other things that could, like, speed up in this regard. There are no, like, with Aurelius being alive is, like, the world's biggest wild card. Like, he knows some things. So, he gets the Dawn Shard, for one, which means he also probably thwarts Nedric, because he also knows who Nedric is. Or he likely does. So, there's a lot of possibility in there. So the question becomes, how would things line up so that would Xena have experienced Forgotten Truths as Zethia or not? And my original thought was it's possible, because it depends on how long after Chapter 14 Zethia wakes up, because of the amount of time she was in the past would be on a 1-to-1 ratio with the amount of time passed in reality, based on the multiverse theorem. I was basing this off of the Chapter 9, where it shows that Chapter 15 is about to occur and Chapter 14 is ended when Yuden's praying. But then it goes back again, back into Chapter 14. So, based on that, I'm inclined to say that perhaps Xena didn't see Forgotten Truths. Because the thing to consider is that when Xena was unpossessed, she was conscious. Like, when Zethia was unpossessed, she was unconscious, or barely conscious, as we find out in Forgotten Truths. But Xena, when she's unpossessed, is conscious. Like, she sees Yuden being possessed, and she's like, no, what did you just do? Like, stop this. And then Yuden's like, I'm sorry, but you're safe now, whatever, and then he gets possessed. But with that, she would not have been in the past then when... Well, my original theory was she would not have been in the past when the transfer happens, so she'd be conscious as opposed to having to return, or having returned afterwards. But we know that Forgotten Truth happened. She returns before Chapter 14 happens. So then the question becomes: Did Forgotten Truths start and end before Chapter 14? Or, like, did it end, like, right during Chapter 14? And then, would the amount of time that things sped up in the alternate reality where, say, Chapter 13 doesn't happen and they don't go to the Binding Ruins, like, would the speeding up of that cause them to have the Chapter 14 raid of Sol Alberia before she was even sent to the past? Because I think that has to be the most likely candidate, considering she was conscious when she returned, or when she was unpossessed.
Yeah, I also, I mean, from what it sounds, I definitely feel like I lean toward her not having canonically experienced what happened in Forgotten Truths. and especially with what Marciati was saying about the trunk of a great tree, I feel like what happened in Forgotten Truths only needs to have happened in. I mean, it only needs to really happen in one timeline, but that doesn't preclude it from happening in others. It's just that like I feel like from a simplicity standpoint as well, like it kind of makes sense that Zethia is the sole purveyor of this knowledge at this point, compared to having Xena know it as well. Like I feel like would that not have changed some of the interactions between Xena and the main cast? It certainly seems reasonable that enough time could have passed, and if she was conscious, and the Sol Alberian raid on the capital happened sooner, that she might not have gone back into the past as an astral or mana projection, I should say. Astrals are a totally different thing.
Yeah. And it also stands to reason that if the other only needed to be created once, then Xena wouldn't need to be sent back. Zethia already was. But then how would the other know which Zethia in which timeline he's possessing to send and which one to not? Because he would only do it once, and it'd be really weird for him to do it with the last one he possesses before he dies, as opposed to one somewhere in the middle or near the beginning. So...
yeah. So I feel like for, barring any other new information where Xena suggests that she knows something about what happened, to me it seems like right now in the main timeline of the campaign, it seems like Zethia is the only one who really knows what happened, but the ending of the event also kind of implies that a lot of people have some knowledge of what really went down. Like Nedrick seems to kind of like wink and nod that he knows Zethia knows about a lot of these hidden truths in the world. So I feel like there's also a lot of just maybe this information isn't widely known to people, but like with the Perditionists, for example, there are murmurs that things are not as they may seem in the past. Because he immediately asks her where she was, I think. And so he kind of already knew that the other was going to do something like this, which is kind of weird.
Yeah, because I definitely feel like if Xena knew what happened in Forgotten Truths, she would 100% shut down the Perditionists like that. Like, because I was rereading chapter 8. Let me find it in my notes. Right. So the Scrolls of Perdition were signed by an Ilian bishop from the time of Forgotten Truths. The time period is what Alex says. She says that the current bishop decreed that we must love Morsayati as well as Ilia. No. So Morsayati we know is what's left of the hatred of Mordecai. So while Mordecai is technically the child of Ilia, like Morsayati has been disowned, basically. So not to mention that Ilia isn't actually a goddess, only in name. So there's that. Let's see. Yeah, so I am curious how Mordecai was created, because I'm fully willing to believe that Ilia could construct a human body with everything except a soul. The question is, where did that body come from? Because maybe it's not fully human, but it has to have some sort of DNA. Every living organism would have DNA. So where did she just synthesize a random string, or did she use like some of her own and like modify it, or where did it come from? Because if she did use her own as a basis, that would definitely be like the child of Ilia. And like she basically raised him in the span of like a week, so that ties to it as well. But yeah, she basically disowned the hatred that became Morsayati. So the other, as the world knows it, is not to be respected as the child of Ilia, and Xena would 100% shut that down if she knew Forgotten Truths.
Yeah, I think the only sense in which the other would be respected as Ilia's child is sort of the sense in which August respects Morsayati, like almost just a demonic worship of the power and cruelty of that being. Because when August is killed by Morseati, he's kind of like enraptured by its power. So perhaps there's a sect of people in the Perditionists or something that like think that, but I think most of them probably are thinking about Mordecai.
Yeah, absolutely, because it was written with from the bishop of the time, but that bishop also existed after Ilia went into the other world and would probably be working off the words of Mene. So Mene probably would have spoken of Morseati, that it was born of Ilia, but like maybe she didn't mention that it was disowned, or like that the evil creature before them was the darkness and evil part. So
there is something really really interesting about Mordecai being such a pure being, and then kind of like there's some original sin element to Morseati spawning out of Mordecai, like at least in my mind, not a direct parallel, but yeah, like like almost humanity's hatred manifest, or the hatred of Mordecai manifest. It's kind of interesting, because like I don't know that if he had never had this experience being around humans and loving humans, like he probably would have never had this emotion of hatred either.
Are you familiar with the TV series Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.?
I've heard of it, but I haven't caught up or watched a lot of it. I've seen all the cinematic universe. There's a character
in one of the later seasons that has just gained the ability to feel emotions, and throws like the world's biggest temper tantrum when they first experience heartbreak. So it's definitely like that. Like Mordecai is a otherworldly being. He has this power, but he just doesn't use it because, you know, he's channeling love and like the good positive feelings. So when for the first time he channels the negative feelings and Ilia isn't alive to direct those, it just manifests. Like, he's never experienced this before, so it just kind of happens. Like, he has this anger and he doesn't know how to deal with it, and his emotional support is not responding. So it creates Morseati. But then, like, literally when Ilia goes back to him alive and like, hey, I'm alive, like suddenly those positive feelings are back and he's able to split from the anger, but the anger is still so strong and has been running for so long that it's its own thing now.
Yeah. That moment is, I mean, I don't know what to make of also. So the moment when they split is interesting, and then the fact that like Morseati is sealed in the other world with them. Are they continuing to clash when they go into the other world? Like, are they presumed dead by virtue of being in the other world? I just feel like this raid has so many unanswered questions for me. Like, definitely more questions than answers after playing through this.
Yeah, I've reached the end of my notes with the last section, the epilogue, and just the thoughts I had while reading it. The first one is, are Ilia and Mordecai coming back? We've touched on that. How does the other break free for the second war of binding? He's probably released by Darnell. This is just a guess. So we know, I believe from chapter 10, that Darnell was originally created as part of the Ilian Church. Or something like that. I don't know. I have to reread it. I'm currently in the midst of rereading it. But basically, of course, Darnell would take the Scrolls of Perdition or something as, you know, the other Morseati is the child of Ilia, and we should worship that because it's the child of our goddess. So it deserves to be worshipped just as much because it's basically a god in its own right. And yeah, Morseati does technically meet the requirements for being considered a god. And that he's a very powerful being. That's really the only one. So let's see.
Yeah, the thing I'm most curious about that is, was there some other purpose? Like, they had always worshipped Morseati, but like, did they open the gate to release Morseati for some reason at the time? So that's what I'm very curious about with the first War of Binding. Like, was something going on in the world that they needed to call upon the power of Murasayati again, or fell into that same pitfall that humanity originally made? Like, I don't know if we'll get into that when we finally find out about that War of Binding, but that's the thing I'm most curious about.
Yeah. I have a note here that there is no goddess, but prayer still works, and it works without the goddess. It just works. It's just prayer. Elysium is still a godly figure, and I'm curious as to why he's regarded as the Holy Worm even before this happens. And then dragons still govern mana. So there's that.
Yeah, we don't know about Elysium's backstory very much, and especially like the childhood period when Ilia was not strong enough to accept the bond, or the pact. So maybe we'll get some exposition on that eventually, as to why Elysium is sort of the holy worm and the arbiter of the world at some level. But I don't know. I mean, they could sort of just leave that up to mystery. Like maybe Elysium doesn't seem to be like a creator god, but maybe Elysium's been there for a long time.
Probably. Someone in chat just said, I hope we can fight Elysium someday. I was fully expecting to fight Elysium in Forgotten Truths. After we did Nightmare, it was either we did Nightmare and then we did like the next story. I don't know. There was a point where we had not unlocked Omega yet, and they didn't even show us like the locked like quest, and I'm like, oh, they're probably not showing it to us because they don't want us to see what characters are in the icon or in the banner for it. And then it was just the fight with the other, which was a cool fight, but like I was kind of surprised that they just didn't show us that it was locked until a certain date. They just kind of showed us that like a story segment would open up on that day. The last thing I have on my list here is Baron. Why is Baron so powerful? And here's probably the scariest thought, not just because it's scary for the implications in the story, but it's scary because of the implications of the lore I'd have to dig through if it's true. What if Baron is an incarnation of the Ancient One?
Wow. I don't know. Like, have we really gotten much Ancient One talk in the main campaign? Like,
about as much as we got about Baron.
Yeah, like, I have a hypothesis that for Halloween we could get an Ancient One raid event of some type. Ancient One adjacent raid event for Halloween. So to me, we might have some answers to this sort of soon. But I kind of feel like the Ancient One is sort of just there on the side. Like it's not really part of the main, like the main host of baddies. It's kind of like the Syndicate or something. Like it's just another thing that's there. Like occasionally a villain of the week will go deal with some Ancient One nonsense, but I would be very shocked if it ends up being that Baron is somehow connected to it. Like Baron specifically has this connection to Void mana and the Void Dragons, and I guess I said Void mana, but I guess the Void Dragons are like made of black mana, like kind of how that corrupts everything.
Yeah, it's just regular dragons corrupted by black mana.
There's also, I mentioned this earlier, but like there's also the Astrals, which is kind of its own weird space as well, that you have to get astral pieces to fight.
Astrals are really weird, because like, is an astral a spirit that takes form? Is like the form itself the astral that's created? Like, do astrals roam the world and collect memories until they find one so powerful they take form? Like, astral to me just seems like a very small description for a gameplay mechanic.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I totally agree. Like I feel like Astral's just kind of like shoehorned in. Like we needed to add something to the Onslaught event to make it cooler, and we need to bring back raid events, so let's do Astral raids and Astral dragons.
The only lore we have on Astrals is Midgard Samar saying, Astrals, they exist. That's it.
Right. Yeah. Very, very true. So somebody said strong memories. Tegan Clark said strong memories taken form from the Onslaught episodes.
And so yeah, strong and be the great worms and the raid bosses. So
Baron's power is interesting, and also when in terms of Yuden's heritage, like why can he form all these pacts? Another thing I wanted to ask you about Straight Lace was this is diverging in topic a little bit, but I feel like you're the expert on this. I have memories, but not clear memories of Fractured Futures, and the Great Worms vis-a-vis Kronos. Is Kronos the fusion of the Great Worms?
Yes.
Am I right on that?
Yep.
So how does Kronos relate to Elysium?
There's a good question. Because, like, part of the question is, where was Elysium in not just Xena's world, but Audric's? Because the other won in both of those worlds. So, Elysium had to have been defeated if he didn't want the other to just take over the world. Although, one thing I think I didn't mention that I had written down, let me find it real quick, is from chapter 5. Where did I write this down? Shoot. Here it is. The other says, alas, this is a necessary step in correcting the world so far distorted. And they're trying to, like, create the Darnell Empire and rule the world. What if the other, in gaining reasoning, has aligned with Elysium's goal for the world to have order? I mean, it's very unlikely, considering, like, the end of chapter 1, where it's like, Elysium, you would stand in my way once again. But it's possible.
Yeah, that could be kind of interesting. If, I mean, definitely, we sense that Morsayati has developed and changed, at least since its primal form. But yeah, Kronos for me was like a point of confusion, because I could never remember if, like, Chthonius was in the mix, or was Chthonius still in the ruins with Alberius's spirit. Like, there's so much. I'm gonna have to probably go reread after this everything. Like, I don't know if maybe the next chapter is the time to do it, but, like, the story chapters, in particular 5 and 10, had a lot going on. There's a lot going on upcoming as well in these interludes with, like, Leonidas and what he's up to, and apparently some acquaintances of Aurelius. But I have no idea. I feel like I'm at more of a loss than in many past chapters as to where the story is going to take us next, as far as the main campaign, at least.
Yeah. So, looking back at the end of chapter 1, Morsayati is like, you vile accursed creature, how dare you stand in my way again, talking about Elysium. And so it bears the thought that even if Morsayati still hates Elysium, maybe Elysium doesn't hate Morsayati and what Morsayati's doing, and hence doesn't get in the way of the quote-unquote order that he's creating. Because remember, Elysium doesn't value human lives individually. He values them as a survival. Now, I can't imagine he would just let the other subjugate so many dragons. But yeah, this theory is pretty weak when thinking about it, but it's out there.
It does feel like there's almost like a Paradise Lost element to their clash, though. Like true in the beginning, true eternal. Like there's this. The sense that you get from when Morsayati emerges is that, like, this battle with Elysium never really ended at some level. Like, this is just like a constant thing, that it's almost like a Luciferian kind of thing going on with, I don't know, like, Morsayati just seems to have this eternal vendetta against Elysium, to where maybe like him coming out of this portal, it's just like this destined battle or clash. But I just feel like Morsayati, the unfortunate thing for me is, like, Morsayati doesn't really have a philosophy in the beginning. Like, Elysium at least has sort of a perspective that you can kind of understand. Morsayati is just hatred manifest. But then by this point, when he's in the main campaign, it does kind of seem like he has some some intention, some design upon the world,
Goals.
not just upon Elysium.
Yep. Yeah, when we first heard of his origins in the First War Binding, before we got Forgotten Truths, my running theory was that obviously humans and dragons were at war. And so humans, needing an edge in the war, summoned the other with the intense purpose of killing dragons. But then humans realized they couldn't really control him, and dragons agreed, and so they teamed up to fight him, and they bound him. And then what would happen in the present is that he's back again, but his goal is still the same. Find and kill or subjugate all dragons. And we know now that it's basically just that, but personal. That he has a hatred for Elysium, and hence dragonkind, I guess. So he still seeks to kill or subjugate the dragons. And in Chapter 10, he offers a world of peace to Yuden, to which Yuden says, "No, give me back my sister, you evil demon." And he's like, "I couldn't care less about humans. I just want to kill all the dragons."
I wonder if it's partially the experience of Mordecai in that, because when you read Mordecai's story, right, as an otherworlder, he has that encounter with Nidhogg, well, a generic dragon with a portrait of Nidhogg, that is just, I mean, from Mordecai's perspective, for no reason, basically just has like I feel like xenophobic is not the right word, but like a fear of him from being from another world, but because of the distortions to mana that happen.
I mean, it's probably not unfounded, though. While, yes, Mordecai is the innocent, pure being, he does turn into the other, and it's quite possible that this is not the first time this has happened. Maybe it's the first time it's happened on this scale, but there seems to be a hint that history repeats itself from time to time, so maybe there was another type of war of binding with a different demon 1,000, 3,000, 10,000 years before what we call the First War of Binding. And then humans were destroyed again and then progressed back to what they were in the First War of Binding, and then that got destroyed, and now we're back here again, where humans are experimenting into alchemy again, and mana casters again, and militant governments again. So there seems to be an air of history repeating itself.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. Like, that's kind of parallel to the real world when you think about ancient civilization and the technology or tools that may have been at our disposal, a lot of which was forgotten. So, and perhaps what we have access to now will be forgotten. Like, that seems very plausible. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I've kind of summarized most of my thoughts on Forgotten Truths. Like, what did you think overall? How do you compare this raid to Fractured Futures? For me, this was like one of my favorite raids for sure.
Oh yeah, for sure. This event and Fractured Futures are definitely my top two. When you posted a poll in your Discord server, like which one was the favorite, I had to think about it for like a good 20 minutes. I think in the end I said Forgotten Truths, and I think the thing that swayed the vote was that Yuden wasn't in this event. And it's not that I don't like him, but it was so refreshing to just have one without him and focus on because we first got a real experience of this in Rhythmic Resolutions, where we only had 3 characters from the main cast with Yuden, Mim, and Not, and that gave so much more breathing room for the other characters in the story. And so in this story, the only character we have from the main cast is Zethia, and she's not even from the main cast. So that gives us way more time to experience Ilia, Mene, Mordecai, August, Elysium, Midgardsormr. There aren't that many characters in this story, and each character shows up in their time. Obviously are the 4 main ones that are traveling together, but beyond that, other characters only show up when they're having their part in the story, like August only when they're facing off against August, and Elysium shows up for exposition dump that lacks all the exposition we really want. And yeah, so with that, Fractured Futures, I really liked. When I first went through Fractured Futures, I'm like, that's it? There's nothing here. But Fractured Futures also contributes a bunch to the lore, because that's the first thing that got me thinking that multiverse time travel was involved. and how it tied into the main campaign with Xena, and how all that started to work. So, Fractured Futures also is paired with Audric's story, and I really liked Audric's story in Fractured Futures and just how tragic it was. Like, as tragic as Forgotten Truths was at the end, it was also kind of sudden. That Illy's just like, bye, Mom, and just out. Like, so it was tragic, and like the exposition we get is tragic too, but the delivery just doesn't land as well as Audric's story, where there's like ramping tragedy. Like, Audric's story opens up with, everyone's dead, we need to go, and they're like, no, Audric, you need to go, we'll hold the line. And Audric's like, no, like, I'm not leaving you guys. Like, Audric, you're our only hope, you gotta go. And then like everyone dies, and then he rounds up survivors, and then they like kill Cassandra, and it's ramping tragedy, and it's done really well. Whereas in this, like, the tragedy just kind of happens in like a single spot of expedition. Like, in the span of 7 days, the world was destroyed.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way of describing things. Like, I ultimately ended up saying I probably like Fractured Futures more, but more so from the gameplay standpoint. Like, for me, that raid captivated me because of Kronos Nyx and Kronos and the first time we got Omega.
Absolutely.
Like, the story was so sad, and it only gets sadder, like the castle story. Like, basically, it's just perpetual sadness. But I do think that there was a suddenness to this. Honestly, I was one of the people who like did not really understand or catch the foreshadowing at all, or get spoiled on Midgard Summer Zero's story. So when I read the epilogue, I was still like sort of in disbelief about what had happened. And after reading Mene's story about like how when she bent her wing to try to save Ilia from falling down, and just the importance of wings to fairy kind, it became that much sadder what happened to her. But at some level, like in Audric's timeline, everybody just died, and Mene did live on, but with kind of a horrible or very difficult burden. But I think she probably genuinely believed in what she was trying to teach people too, about humans and dragons coexisting. Interestingly, coming from a fairy who kind of knew both worlds a little bit better than your typical human, your typical dragon might.
Yeah. And also on your point of gameplay with Fractured Futures, Kronos' attacks were also much more iconic than Morsayade's. In like his large form, he had like Channel Fraganoth, Channel Volfar, and like I don't know, his other attacks were kind of basic, but like the fact that he pulled from other fights like that. And then in Kronos Nyx, the fact that he used all afflictions. Like, I can probably tell you every single move that Kronos Nyx uses, because they're all so unique. Whereas Morsayade, he does have a lot of moves, but none of them really had a unique personality to them, because all of Nyx's had a different affliction associated with them. That's why they're so memorable. So, yeah, I'd say Nyx was out of all the fights, Nyx is probably my favorite in terms of gameplay and initial presentation. Because the other thing, when I first did the Nightmare run of Morsayade, we cleared too fast and I missed the cutscenes. And then I got spoiled on that there were cutscenes, and then they didn't land as much because I knew they existed. I didn't see them in context. So,
yeah, I feel the same way. Like, the cutscenes were very cool. I hope they do that in future raid events, especially when they're the bigger raid events that are kind of like marquee events. But for me, like, the battle itself, Nyx was the most dynamic and exciting. I did notice that, Morsayade could do some afflictions, but I remember falling asleep at some point. I feel like somebody on my team might have gotten bogged, but maybe not. Like, maybe I wasn't paying attention. But his, at least like visually, all of his moves were like shadowy and evil and dark. Yeah. Whereas with Kronos Nyx, it was like different elemental attacks, or visually elemental.
Yeah, I know in Morsayade, I've gotten cursed, and I'm pretty sure I got bogged at one point, but I couldn't tell you which attack did it. So.
Yeah. Oh, somebody mentioned the twins. The Gold Crow mentioned the twins being theorized to be fairies.
Oh, yeah. Real quick, I want to give another note on the Agito before we go down that line. That I think, even though Chapter 10 was great, it would have been much more impactful if instead of Tartarus, Tartarus was Chthonius. And, like, we find out that that was the fate of Chthonius. That, like, he found out that the king he loved died. And that, like, basically swap the name and make Tartarus Chthonius. That he found out the king he loved died and never returned to the Halidom. And, like, cast off his horns and his dragonhood. And, like, I guess, like, a dragon casting off their horns is kind of like a fairy casting off their wings. Because, like, the first thing when I saw Tartarus, I'm like, that can't be a dragon. He doesn't have horns. But according to one of the Agito weapon stories, he broke them off. So...
Oh, I need to read those. I haven't read Tartarus's yet.
Yeah, so... and, like, I think it would have been very impactful if that was Chthonius. Like, instead of a new dragon, it's like... Alberius, like, sealed himself, like, on his own or something, and then we find out that Chthonius never returned because he went about, like, in mourning for 300 years before meeting up with Nedric, and Nedric's like, this world has betrayed you, team up with me and let's destroy it. So, and then he appears, and of course Cleo recognizes him. He's like, oh my gosh, Chthonius, where have you been? And he's like, this world is, like, taken everything from me, and it deserves to die now.
It would be cool to have one of the Great Worms, although it would put it in an interesting place as far as, is it a High Dragon trial? Is it an Agito Uprising battle? But it would, like, I feel like Chthonius was kind of done wrong. When the game first launched, and it was like, there's 6 Great Worms, but one of them died in the war. And it was kind of, like, very clear that he's not dead. Like, there's something going on with the 6th Great Worm. Otherwise, like, why do they even point that out, right?
Yeah, like, don't get me wrong, Chapter 10 was still good. I just think it would have been more impactful if he was one of the Agito, as opposed to, like, a new dragon taking that role. Because, like, the problem here is that Tartarus had no previous foreshadowing. He's just inserted in after the fact, where I think Chthonius has been there from the get-go. So,
yeah, that is kind of a challenge with all of the Agito at some level, because the Agito are some of my favorite characters, but had they been, like, scattered throughout Arc 1, that could have been very, very interesting. Like, there are probably more plot elements than that are sort of just, like, retconned or added on as we go, I feel like, at some level. But yeah, the Agito are definitely the thing I'm most excited about for the next few story chapters, and I'm just really curious to see where they go. To the commenter in the chat who posted about the fairies being or the twins being fairies, like, I think it makes perfect sense based on everything we know.
I agree
about freedom and fairies having to stay in their kingdom, and it makes perfect sense to me.
The one thing that doesn't make sense to me is that fairies don't increase in size until they reach adolescence, which is adulthood, and the twins do not act like adults. Maybe they were spoiled like children their entire lives or something, but yeah, no, their combined form is definitely a fairy. Like, all the Agito take mythical creature forms. Volk is a werewolf, Kayan is a minotaur, Ciela is a harpy, the twins are a fairy, and Chthonius is a dragon. Not Chthonius, Tartarus is a dragon. So,
do they have wings in their human form? Well, not human, but, like, in their default form?
Let me pull up Google Images. Not conventionally. They have, like, little wings coming off the top of their head, and, like, I can't tell if that's wings or clothing.
Yeah, I know in the past people had commented on the horns that they have, and I think there was some speculation that they could be like Oni or like demons of some type, but, like, maybe they're Hinamotoan fairies or something, just based on their names and aesthetic. But I haven't read their weapon series, so that's another one that I'm now very barely collecting. But looking on the wiki, their story is called Fairy Tale Twins. Their introduction story.
Yep.
Which is kind of on the nose.
Yeah.
So,
another thing, when we got tier 2 weapons, I think we also got like new lore details. Because the tier 2s had like different weapon descriptors that talked about the Agito. Did we lose those when we got the weapon update?
I don't think we would have lost them, but I'm not sure where they would be. So, because did the tier 2 weapon replace the story that would have been on the tier 1?
I don't know.
Oh, so people are saying yes, we lost them.
Ah, darn it! They retconned lore.
It's not canon anymore. I mean,
well, it's
maybe
a good
they'll
thing I
find
didn't
another
read
way
it,
to
because now I
shoehorn
won't
it in.
consider it.
So I have to go read those on the wiki then. I'm still trying to finish up some of my tier 2 weapons right now.
I still at some point need to read like every single worm print and every single weapon and just all the lore.
Yeah, I feel like I'm a ways behind you, Straight Lace, after talking to you. So, thank you for letting me be the sounding board with random ideas and random theories, because I feel like that's about all I'm good for at this point with the story. But I have been enjoying keeping up with it as much as I can.
It occurs to me that it's been over 2 hours and I never turned on my background music. Shoot, I forgot again. There we go. Background music is on for the last few minutes. All right. But yeah, thank you for joining me here today. Do we have any other closing thoughts before we wrap up?
Not too much on my end. I'm just gonna be kind of chilling in Dragalia Lost for the next week or so until the new story chapter comes out. I played Postmortem Panic. That was very fun. And just kind of grinding it out with the 2nd anniversary. So I don't really think I have anything else to add. I feel like there are a lot of ways I would like to have seen Forgotten Truths go in my headcanon. I'm always going to be somebody who doesn't really understand time travel super well and power levels super well. But it's been very fun discussing this. So I think that's probably going to do it for me for tonight, Straight Lace. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for joining me.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Laters. So I am probably going to end the stream here as well. If anyone wants to continue discussing things, I have a link to my Discord in the description. And I have a link to Foundry's channel, which I believe also has a link to his Discord, where I hang out a lot. So if anyone wants to continue talking about things, you can find me there. Thank you for everyone for joining me. I'm sorry I didn't read chat as much, because I was having more of a discussion and looking at other things. I have 3 screens in my setup now, so I have a lot of things to look at. Yeah, thank you for joining me. And I will see you guys next time we have lore to talk about. We're getting a new story chapter soon. So that's something to talk about, but I probably won't do a live stream for at least 2 weeks. So this will be archived on my channel. You can watch it again at any time. Excuse me. And listen to its lack of music. God, I made a whole playlist. I recreated my my Dragalia Lost background music playlist. I can't believe I forgot it. Oof. Anyway, thank you for joining me. I will see you guys next time.